If this was a nothing incident, how did over 60 law enforcement members get injured?
Because they went to stop it.
In other words,
scuffles happened.
Max, you had injected with a point way earlier. I want you to
trying to topple the government political violence.
No, yes, we counted January 6th as political violence by all metrics. It resulted in the largest FBI task force in history, as opposed to the far more damaging Black Lives Matter rallies, including a rally on May 29th through 31st that turned into a riot that attacked the White House, injuring over 60 law enforcement officers using lethal weapons such as Molotov cocktails in an attempt to get into the White House and remove Donald Trump. Something that was so bad that Donald Trump was forced to be moved into a bunker, to which many lefties, including Joe Biden, made fun of him for having to be moved to a bunker. No, what was going on January 6th wasn't them trying to overflow the government, as is evidenced by the fact that they were able to infiltrate the Capitol and didn't do anything in order to overthrow the government and peacefully left by the end of it. Now, it's interesting that your partner talked about engagement when police were starting violence and things like that, but none of that consideration is given for what happened on January 6th.
Hold on, can we cut down the monologues? So somehow January 6th was peaceful. Is that what you said?
No, I believe I said the exact opposite, that we count that as an instance of violence, although it wasn't an attempt to overthrow the government. Do you count May 20? Do you count May 30th and 31st as an act of violence when left-wingers injured 60 law enforcement officers using Molotov cocktails attempting to get into the White House? Do you count that as an act?
I didn't even hear about that.
That's right. Isn't that interesting? You didn't hear about that. And that's sort of my point, that this left-wing violence occurs so often that we just accept it. And so when something like May 30th, 31st happens and 60 law enforcement people are injured, you know what you did hear about, though? You heard about Bunker Boy. You heard the left making fun of Trump for Secret Service having to move him to a bunker.
I didn't even hear that.
Well, I guess, it's a shame that the media doesn't cover these examples of left-wing violence attempting to get into the White House to usurp the president.
So May that actually never happened.
It did happen. May 30th, 31st.
No, it didn't happen.
2020. It did happen.
2020.
No. So what actually happened, they threw plastic bottles, rocks and fireworks and a few incendiary bottles over the fence line. One small fire was set in the historic St. John's Episcopal Church across the street. About 60 Secret Service officers and 11 U.S. Park police officers were injured, but no protester breached the White House grounds and no one stormed or attacked the building itself. No credible evidence shows an organized left-wing or BLM plot to firebomb or enter the White House. So, I mean, what you've just said didn't happen.
It certainly happened. What I said was there was an attempt by them using Molotov cocktails, that's an incendiary device, that resulted in over 60 agents being hurt, an attempt to breach the White House. That's exactly what happened.
No protester attempted to breach the White House.
That's not true. That's not true.
You're breaking your own rule there, Craig. You just interrupted. I don't mind if you guys want to have the back and forth, but
he literally finished his sentence.
No, he did not.
That's not...
He did.
It's not true that they didn't attempt to get into the White House. The fact that they were unsuccessful doesn't mean that they didn't attempt. They were attacking and injured 60 law enforcement agents. In your estimation, what were they doing then as they marched towards the White House and were using lethal weapons to attack law enforcement? What, they were just going to stop at the lawn?
There is no evidence they were trying to get into the White House.
Yes, the evidence is they were marching to the White House.
So maybe they wanted to be around the White House to have a protest. There's literally zero evidence that they were trying to get into the White House. There was no attempted breach. No one even went near the White House. The most that happened was a little rocket bottle firework went over the fence. Nobody attempted to go anywhere near the White House. You are literally reading from right-wing propaganda that's exaggerating an incident that really didn't happen.
That's not true. They literally were stopped feet outside the White House fence. They were stopped literally right outside it. Downplaying it like, oh, it was just like one Molotov cocktail. And yes, they just burnt down one building. Like, can you explain to me, if this was a nothing incident, how did over 60 law enforcement members get injured?
Because they went to stop it.
In other words,
scuffles happened. I'm not saying that there wasn't violence. I'm not saying that. Don't get me wrong. But your claim of them trying to breach the White House is just factually incorrect. No law enforcement. Hold on. No law enforcement reported that was happening. No media reported that was happening. No statistics and nothing from it afterwards reported that anyone attempted to breach the White House. There is zero evidence that happened. If there is evidence that what you are saying took place, that they attempted to breach the White House. Could you please present it other than just saying, well, what else were they doing there?
Yes,
Please,
look at
could you
there's
just show me
tons
the
of
evidence?
yes, there's tons of videos online showing them using weapons, attacking law enforcement, marching towards the White House, chanting about hating Donald Trump and wanting to remove him. The idea that you want us to believe that because CNN or another media outlet that barely covered this story anyways didn't say, and oh, by the way, they were trying to get into the White House. And we can see that with our own eyes, that as they attack law enforcement marching toward the White House, where Secret Service was forced to remove Donald Trump because they were getting so close to the White House, so they had to remove him to a secure bunker. And you saying, but unless CNN tells me that they were attempting to get into the White House, then we don't accept it. It's absolute bullshit. Everyone could see what they were doing.
So a statement from the Secret Service says there was physical confrontations and projectiles at officers, but there was no attempt for anyone to breach the White House perimeter. That is from the Secret Service.
No, I don't. Then why did they move Trump to a bunker?
That's just protocol.
So show me put the source up.
All my sources will be in the description of this video.
I want what are you reading from right now? That a quote from the Secret Service.
I'm reading media reports from what the Secret Service said. The Secret Service statement, May 31st, 2020, described physical confrontations and projectiles at officers, but made no claim that anyone tried to breach the White House perimeter. No, it's actually Washington something or other.
Okay,
Washington Post.
Wait. Read that
I
again.
don't think Washington Post.
Read that again.
Read it again.
Yes.
Secret Service statement from May 31st, 2020 described physical confrontations and projectiles at officers, but made no claim that anyone tried to breach the White House perimeter. Now, I will admit that this is just the first news story that I have... Wait, hold on, let me finish my point. This is the first news story that I've come across, but I am yet to come across any stories that report any attempt to...
You misrepresented what that said,
I am yet to come across any stories that say that they attempted to breach the White House perimeter.
That's not the point, Craig. You misrepresented what it said.
How will I? So a statement from the Secret Service says there was no attempt for anyone to breach the White House perimeter. Secret Service statement from May 31st, 2020 described physical confrontations and projectiles at officers, but made no claim that anyone tried to breach the White House perimeter. There was no attempt, made no claim. There was no attempt, made no claim. There was no attempt, made no claim.
You originally said that the Secret Service said they did not attempt to breach.
Issued a statement.
They issued a statement.
Let me finish. Service statement, May 31st, 2020.
I understand that, that's not what you just read, though. What you just read.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
No,
originally, please, Craig, please. Weren't you upset? Weren't you upset when you said people were interrupting you? I've been very patient and allowed you to talk the entire time.
I apologize. I'm not interrupting.
That's fine.
I don't mind. I personally don't mind if you guys interrupt, as long as you guys can do it with some decorum.
Just to clarify, I have not changed what I've said. What I've said from the beginning and what I say now is Secret Service statement. You took an opportunity to interrupt
right after crying poo-poo. Go ahead, Robert.
All right. It seemed that what you were suggesting originally was the Secret Service made a declarative statement that no one tried to breach the White House. Now what you're reading is that they didn't make a statement that someone did attempt to breach the White House. Those are two different things.
No. That's not what I've said. I've said every single time the Secret Service statement, May 31st, 2020, described physical confrontations and projectiles at officers, but made no claim that anyone tried to breach the White House perimeter. That is what I have said all along. I have never changed what I've said.
That's not what it sounded like you said. Nonetheless, we'll move
that's
on
not
with
the
the clarification.
Made, Craig,
we'll move on.
That's the exact. I'm reading the exact same thing every single time. I have read the same words every time. I don't know what you guys are hearing, but
well, you're interrupting again a little more aggressively, and that's, like I say, it's fine. But let's let Robert finish his point.
Okay. Nonetheless, we could see that anyone with any modicum of sense could see that as they were marching to the White House, they were attempting to get in the White House as they were injuring Secret Service and other law enforcement. And here's what happens. Because the media doesn't cover it, because the FBI never did a large investigation into that, because Democrats made fun of Trump for having to be used to a bunker, we don't consider this as a serious issue. Now, I guarantee that Craig's CISIS data doesn't include this as an example of left-wing violence, despite the fact that it was so serious that the president was moved to a bunker. Craig, since you haven't been able to provide example yet of the data you're using and how many left-wing examples of violence there was in 2020, I'll ask you now, does it specifically cite this incident as an example of left-wing violence?
I have not seen this specific incident in the reports. I could check to see. Again, the reports are extensive. There is many of them containing thousands of pages of data, and I have not perused all of them. I have tried to analyze the figures that are possible, but I was only told about this debate a couple of weeks ago, and I've been dealing with my mum dying, so I have not gone through every single page of every single thing. I have, however, read the conclusions and the analysis of them. But just going back to the, I'm literally finding zero reports of them. The most it says is that Trump was moved to the bunker after protesters breached temporary fences near the White House complex.
Okay,
that's not them attempting to breach the White House.
I'll read some.
What you were referring to?
Yes, it stands by what it says. I stand by. They were attacking the White House. They were using law enforcement. The difference was law enforcement knows that the left's violent, and so they had an adequate presence there. Unlike when right wingers protest, and there's almost no violence. To go off some of these, like the Persecution Project, which is one of the studies that's often cited. I went through this before. Actually, someone else went through it, but I've read this on stream. Here's some examples, just starting randomly in 2020. Of things they categorize as right-wing violence. 2 cases of people arrested and charged for peacefully protesting outside of abortion clinic. That was considered right-wing violence. Next up, we have an armed robbery that targeted Mexicans. The armed robbers were blacks. This counted as 3 different events as right-wing violence because they used racial slurs at the Hispanics. So 3 black people robbing a Mexican but using racial slurs at Mexicans, that counts as right-wing violence. Next, there was a defacement of a Catholic church. This was considered a right-wing example of violence. So they put swastikas, KKK, white supremacists, Satan lives here. That was categorized as an example of right-wing violence. Next, we have Muslims that were attacking Jews. 2022, Shadeen Hussein was charged with felony hate crimes, criminal damage, and defacement over the previous week. Hussein targeted synagogues with hate symbols, etc. This wasn't categorized as Islamic violence. It was categorized as right-wing violence, right? Now, this is just the examples that they miscategorized as right-wing violence. It doesn't include the examples that they didn't include of left-wing violence. Now, what I'm asking you specifically to do, and you keep mischaracterizing it, is you keep saying, I haven't got into the specifics. All I'm asking you is, what was the total in your data, the total examples of left-wing violence in 2020? That shouldn't be hard to come up with. What's the total amount? Yes, in 2020.
Sorry, before you asked me for 5 specific ones, which I'd gathered.
I asked for 5 specific political riots from the right, sure. But the first question I asked you that you said you were researching was, how many examples of left-wing violence does CISA say happened in 2020?
All right. No, that's sorry.
While you look for that, go ahead.
And now I've got. Well, you asked me for the 5. You didn't ask me for the total. So which one do you want? Because
I asked you.
Go back into my data now.
I'm more than willing to accept. I asked 2 questions. The first question I asked, and you started typing and said you were researching it, was, how many examples does your data of left-wing violence have in 2020? And you said, let me get that for you.
But now 5. That's what I've done. Yeah.
Okay, but that's fine. That I asked that question.
Do you want those 5?
Sure. Right-wing riots, political riots. Here we go.
Boogaloo killings in California, the Michigan governor kidnapping plot, the Kenosha shooter, the Portland vehicle ramming and armed confrontations, the militia convoy, Oregon State Capitol, December 2020.
Wait, did one of those say the Kenosha shooter? Kyle Rittenhouse was considered right-wing violence? Someone who was found innocent.
Who aligned himself online with pro-militia rhetoric, shot people during Kenosha, Wisconsin 22.
This is
Max,
what I'm talking about.
Would you agree that Kyle Rittenhouse was right wing? I mean,
I don't know. I think that he was someone that was upset that left wingers were rioting and he wanted to defend property, right? But seeing as how he did not commit an unjustified act of violence and was merely defending himself again against violent left wingers. Now I wonder, does that same data set that falsely likens Kenosha as right wing violence because Rittenhouse lawfully defended itself, does it also list it as left wing violence?
Well, I'm looking at one bit of data right now. I'm just trying to confirm. Everything that I can see shows Kyle Rittenhouse as being right-wing and acting in a violent way, seen by extremist channels of Patriot Hero, where he claimed self-defense but acted amid armed right-wing counter-mobilization. Claimed self-defense but acted armed right-wing counter-mobilization around protests. I mean, all the statistics include that in there.
Okay, so just to be clear, now the audience can see what I'm talking about. Now, a person who was frustrated because, let me finish, law enforcement stood down. If you remember the story, what happened, I forget the name of the gentleman, but there was a black gentleman who was taken out by police, and it later found out that that was justified. It was misrepresented because what he was doing was going into a car with a knife where there were children after the police attempted to tase him. But the media decided to downplay this and paint the story as the opposite and say this was an innocent black man that was killed. This resulted in riots that was occurring in Kenosha. Police stood down. The governor refused to accept the National Guard. So what happened was citizens decided to arm themselves because of constant nights of left-wing rioting and decided that they were going to protect property. In the instance of that, we had a violent person that attacked Rittenhouse while he was open carrying. Rittenhouse attempted to flee the scene. That person chased him. Behind Rittenhouse, he heard a gunshot. He turns around in a moment of panic. The man's grabbing his gun and he fires his firearm. It ends up taking out that person. Then a mob of people attack Rittenhouse, one of them themselves armed. Rittenhouse shoots back in self-defense and immediately runs to the police. He's later exonerated in a court of law. And all of the data that you're using qualifies that not as a left-wing example of violence that was covered up for by the media and the police stood down for, which it actually was, but actually qualifies it as an example of right-wing violence. This is why Grid and I don't trust the data.
This is why you can't trust the data, period.